In its early years, the creature feature was rooted in mankind's fallibility. Some of the prime examples of the genre, including Godzilla and King Kong, had a modest human quality to them by using their iconic monsters to symbolize our relationship with the world. Godzilla was a manifestation of Japan's perspective on nuclear warfare, while Kong was an exploration of nature's untamable fury and the conflicted empathy of humanity. Or alternatively, you could just ignore all that commentary bollocks for kick-ass fight scenes and frightening spectacles that, let's face it, really define the genre. But with so many prolific creatures out there, in this video I want to give specific attention to one of the more underappreciated subcategories in the monster movie genre. And that is the spider. Let's talk about it. I hate spiders beyond belief. I wouldn't call myself arachnophobic, but if I see one in my room, I have the fire department on speed dial. That said, I have more leniency when it comes to fiction, as there are quite a few spider-oriented movies I enjoy, which we'll explore throughout the video. Of course, spider movies aren't the most established subgenre, or have a substantial enough following to warrant any sort of timeline, but over the course of the last 60 years or so, they have trended in mild notoriety. I don't need to tell you why spiders are so ubiquitous with common fear. Granted, there are scarier things in this world to worry about, but between every axe-wielding psychopath and camera-wielding vlogger, I'm much more suspicious about anything born with 8 hairy legs and has the ability to mercilessly cocoon its victim and eat it later. As a normal part of nature, we have conditioned spiders with so many things we associate with fear, but there are some who just develop bad habits by simply watching too many forms of fear-mongering media. What the hell are you looking at? One of the earliest examples of the spider movie was Jack Arnold's 1955 feature Tarantula, a film that was part of an unspoken new wave of horror-oriented monster movies in the 1950s, including The Blob, Attack of the Killer Crabs, Attack of the Giant Leeches, The Deadly Mantis, The Black Scorpion, Them, and Attack of the 50-Foot Woman. I mean, it was the 50s, so I assume that scared a lot of men. Much like Godzilla in Japan the year before, Tarantula was part of this increasing thematic trend towards Cold War tensions. Many of these monster movies all effectively played the same trope, of giganticizing an average insect or animal because of nuclear or chemical exposure, where, as a result, the monsters become this symbolic representation of human fears and phobias, and the gradual destruction of mankind. If indeed Tarantula was less about negative consequences and more about experiments designed to benefit the world backfiring. They even made it look like these creatures were impenetrable to damage, just add this extra unstoppable tyrant of terror. Just look at this thing, it's not even phased. It does not give a damn about your oh wait, never mind. Regardless, these films were all about scale before intimacy became a profound perspective for the genre, especially in Arnold's follow-up The Incredible Shrinking Man, which reversed the perspective of having the human shrink instead of giganticizing the spider. In fact, even before all of them, King Kong originally had a scene involving a giant spider pit that was cut apparently due to it halting the pace of the story, but several sources suggest it had more to do with the negative reception it received by test audiences who found it deeply harrowing. And that's no surprise when Peter Jackson's adaptation decided to go all in on this lost scene and create a horrifying bug pit that builds in overwhelming intensity until that stupid moment when Jimmy Bell decides to blind fire the bugs off Adrian Brody, somehow without hitting him. It wasn't until the 70s when spider movies started making regular appearances in many made-for-TV schlock that took themselves way too seriously. By this point, sci-fi, while still going very strong, took more of a backseat to the horror genre that began exploding in popularity. We still had one obligatory giant spider movie, literally called The Giant Spider Invasion, and because it was now the age of colour, it allowed these films to be both graphically violent and hilariously stupid. But it was the push to normal-sized spiders that began giving them a slightly more realistic edge, yet comparably, given the circumstances, Charlotte's Web could be taken as just as realistic. While Tarantula was certainly effective at times, going for a more grounded take on the conventional bloodthirsty spider, it was Kingdom of the Spiders starring William Shatner that brought about a more believably sinister tone, or at least it tried to. While the film has its moments of campy B-movie goodness, it really wouldn't surprise me if Frank Darabont took heavy inspiration from the film for his adaptation of The Mist, given how absolutely grim the entire film becomes. By the 70s, along with the intensifying Cold War pressures, there was a growing fear towards the fierce unpredictability of natural disasters that sparked a sudden influx in nature rampage-style horror movies about bees, frogs, and rabbits because apparently Watership Down wasn't enough. Naturally, it was Steven Spielberg's Jaws that reminded audiences that sometimes the scariest things in life are the most real, as opposed to the perpetuation of supernatural or fantastical elements. Sure, the premise of spiders hunting humans is pure fantasy, but playing up the drama of the what if, Kingdom of the Spiders was the better example of nature going about its wild, untamable self. It reflected the complacency of humans' ownership of the world, but more so what made it work was how anyone scared of spiders will find it to be a deeply overwhelming film at times, especially given how it concludes in a Hitchcock's The Bird style ending where, by boarding up in safety and essentially ignoring the problem, they inadvertently cocoon themselves and allow the spiders to encase the entire town in webbings. I mean, fuck that, am I right? In the 80s, slasher movies were the popular craze of the decade, before oversaturation led to devaluation, and so the 90s was attempting to salvage the horror genre as much as possible, just in time for the fears of the new millennium. And from there, anything and, well, everything was on the table, including a new trend of spider movies. However, there was one spider movie in 1990 that existed completely independent of any trend called Arachnophobia, which I think is the definitive spider movie classic, or at least the most mainstream of the genre. Not only did it have Jeff Daniels and John Goodman at the helm, but it was directed by Frank Marshall, who was a co-founder of Spielberg's production company Amblin Entertainment. Arachnophobia tells the story of a new species of spider discovered in the Amazon rainforest that makes its way to America and breeds and infests in a local town. Nothing about it is out of the ordinary. It doesn't ask you to wildly expand your disbelief. It isn't the spider's goal to kill humans, they simply see them as nothing more than a threat in their way, and the film makes the most of its subtle tension, relying on everyday circumstances to create a relatable sense of fear, like finding spiders in your shoes or under your table or somewhere you can't see them.
He came across one of the offending spiders a couple hours ago.
Might you have brought it with you?
Actually, it's probably still in the bottom of my shoe.
It's pretty much a domestic thriller involving spiders that builds off the framework of Kingdom of the Spiders. One could even argue it's a less cynical and more family-friendly rip-off at times, but I'd argue it's definitely a far superior film because of its focus on our common intimate phobia of spiders, applying some genuinely interesting pseudoscience, and capturing the sense that a spider can insidiously hide anywhere, even just over your shoulder. Made you look. We could be here forever talking about the copious amounts of crap that came out in the noughties, so to keep it simple, let's talk about one film that was greatly aware of all the tropes and cliches that had situated themselves within the creature feature genre over the last 50 years. This was Eight-Legged Freaks. This film encapsulates virtually everything we've talked about at this point. It's a schlocky monster B-movie that builds towards this alien invasion style climax with common species of spiders that get increasingly larger and more aggressive over time. Personally, I think it's very hit or miss in terms of both horror and comedy. Hold on a minute, yes, while I certainly agree it is self-aware, I do also happen to think it's very clunky at being a satire of creature features, because for every cliche it embraces, it's never as witty as you think it should be. It benefits mostly from David Arquette, who at the time was primarily famous for playing Dewey in the horror satire Scream, while I think also trying to become a professional wrestler as well, but there are other characters who stand out just as much personality-wise. You have future Black Widow Scarlett Johansson, an eccentric alien conspiracy DJ, a cop who for the longest time I thought was Dr. Phil, and then you have the guy who voiced Nibbler doing the vocal effects for the spiders. I swear to God, just listen to them. The plot is practically an amalgamation of every spider movie. It's got the growing scale and use of the Arizona desert setting of Tarantula, which ended up being used in almost every other spider movie anyway. There's the spiders breeding under the shopping mall similar to Arachnophobia's barn and basement. There's the gradual invasion similar to Kingdom of the Spiders, and then you end it with a rescue mission very similar to Curse of the Black Widow. While Arachnophobia can be seen as the more, mature film, shall we say, Eight-Legged Freaks is the one that simply wanted to indulge in the absurdity of the subgenre, even if I just can't get behind some of its awkward humour and the lack of any clever lampooning. Although, contrary to my criticism, I will say that if we ignore it as a satire and just treat it as a goofy slapstick comedy, I do love that the spiders begin as these creepy, menacing killers, and by the end they're just kinda dumb. It goes from Kingdom of the Spiders and Arachnophobia to basically Gremlins meets Tremors. Also, last note, on the horror front, it does do things super well. I mean, just look at the scene when the spider emerges from behind the old man's chair. That's the kind of stuff that makes you look over your shoulder. Made you look again. There are plenty of other spider movies in the noughties, but none of them hold a candle to Kingdom, Arachnophobia, or Eight-Legged Freaks. Spiders as a real creature have a lot to them that make them terrifying forces of nature. The way they look, move, hunt, and devour their prey is truly the stuff of nightmares. But it's a concept that can only go so far when it's purely dependent on a common phobia. You could consider it this way. It's a cliched forced attempt at fear similar to shallow tropes like killing a dog to evoke sadness, yet on a very basic level, it still works. Spiders embody horror. They can represent aggression, cunningness, mystery, surprise, power, and helplessness. But sometimes, just like spiders in real life, the best way to deal with an inconsistent subgenre that keeps trying to poke its head through the cracks of a genre that struggled to stay afloat in recent years is to simply leave it be, and let nature run its course. Or set your house on fire, I mean, that works too. Hi everyone, thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments below what your favourite spider movie is, or well, any creepy crawly movie in fact. I'm opening the floor to any suggestion whatsoever. If you enjoy what I do here and you want to help fight demonetization, which is getting right up my ass at the minute, you can do so by supporting me over on Patreon, where you'll get early access and even occasionally vote on future videos as well. And until next time, you can follow me over on Instagram and even on Twitter. It's great to see people over there chatting away, all sorts of nonsense. And yeah, I'm gonna go back to bed because I'm still recovering from sickness. And stay safe. I'll see you all very soon. Bye!